Welcome everyone to the National Council of Jewish Women Bergen County Section special event, a panel discussion on rising anti-Semitism on U.S. college campuses. My name is Lois Katz-Brown, and I am the chair of our Committee on Racial Equity and Anti-Semitism. Tonight's program aims to present a realistic picture of anti-Semitism on our college campuses, considering cultural and historical factors also. We do not want to underestimate or overestimate its significance. To place in context, however, the Holocaust was not an aberration. For more than 1,000 years, European Jews suffered violent church and state-sponsored persecution and pogroms before European anti-Semitism culminated in the Holocaust. However, compared to our history in Europe, throughout our 400 years in North America, Jews have suffered prejudice and discrimination, but relatively little outright violence. In contrast, throughout the same 400 years in America, Native Americans and African Americans have suffered from extreme violence, perpetrated or condoned by both church and state, as it was for European Jews. Fortunately for us, however, despite prejudice and discrimination, American Jews have thrived. And fortunately for us, our current government is proactive in fighting anti-Semitism, not sponsoring it. Nevertheless, over the last decade, there has been an unprecedented rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, including violent and murderous attacks, which are new to our experience as American Jews. It is our responsibility to confront this new insidious, sometimes violent anti-Semitism and mitigate it as best we can. Tonight, our esteemed panelists will discuss their varied experiences with anti-Semitism on their respective college campuses, and hopefully we'll have some positive suggestions on how to combat it. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you our moderator and 5 panelists. Our moderator, Dina Yellen, is a religion reporter for The Record and the USA Today Network. Dina Yellen has covered the clergy abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, the impact of COVID-19 on religious worship, and the spate of synagogue shootings around the country. In recent months, she has written extensively about rising anti-Semitism on American college campuses and the effects of the Israel-Hamas war on northern New Jersey families. Her portfolio of work earned top honors last year from the New Jersey Press Association. Dina is an alumna of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, and her work has also appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsday, and the Jerusalem Post. Our first panelist who I will talk about is Professor Ross Brand. Professor Brand is a Milton R. Konvitz Professor of Judeo-Islamic Studies and a Stephen H. Weiss Presidential Fellow at Cornell University. A true scholar, Professor Brand studied at the University of California, Berkeley, the Hebrew University, Jerusalem, New York University, and the American University in Cairo, Egypt. He has taught at Cornell in New York State since 1986 and served 19 years as chair of its Department of Near Eastern Studies. Professor Brand is the author or editor of numerous books and essays on the intersection of Jewish and Islamic culture. He serves as a fellow of the American Academy for Jewish Research, the Medieval Academy of America, the University of Michigan Frankel Institute for Advanced Judaic Studies, and the University of Pennsylvania Katz Center for Judaic Studies. Our next panelist is Rabbi Ira Dunn. Rabbi Ira Dunn is Associate Director of the Center for Jewish Life, Hillel, at Princeton University in New Jersey, and was raised in the Reform community in Teaneck, New Jersey. He earned a bachelor's degree in public policy studies at the University of Chicago with a focus on healthcare and human rights. After college, Rabbi Dunn studied at Yeshivat HaMivtar in Israel, Yeshivat Hovevi Torah in New York City, and was ordained at the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York. He discovered his passion for engaging with young leaders while working with Jewish teens in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. Rabbi Dunn has led many Jewish-themed trips and programs for young adults in the U.S., Latin America, Israel, and Europe. Our first student panelist is Lily Cohen. Lily is a senior at Northwestern University in Chicago, Illinois, studying political science and civic engagement. Raised in Bergen County, she first engaged with pro-Israel activism through the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey's ICAN Teen Task Force. The National Council of Jewish Women Bergen County section awarded her the Bach Scholarship 4 years ago. During her time at Northwestern, Lily has led on-campus efforts to advocate for Israel, in addition to serving in leadership roles for Northwestern College Democrats and Northwestern Students Demand Action. She also serves as Vice President of Advocacy on the American Jewish Committee's Global Campus Board and was awarded the Sharon Green Award for Campus Advocacy at AJC's Global Forum in Tel Aviv in 2023. Lily has written about the experiences of being a Jewish college student for the Daily Northwestern and USA Today, and has spoken in the Chicago area and around the country about anti-Semitism on college campuses. Our next student is Jonah Sherrill. Jonah is an Englewood, New Jersey native and graduate of Ramaz Upper School in New York City. Currently a senior at Duke University, Trinity College of Arts and Sciences in North Carolina, Jonah is majoring in political science and minoring in visual and media studies with a certificate in innovation and entrepreneurship. He is co-president of Chabad Students at Duke Undergrads and acting vice president of strategy for campus enterprises. Following graduation, Jonah plans to pursue a career in New York in healthcare investment banking. Our final, but not least important, student panelist is Kaylee Werner. Kaylee is a junior at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Originally from Pittsburgh, Kaylee is a former member of the Tree of Life Synagogue that experienced in 2018 the deadliest attack on Jews in United States history. Fortunately, her family was not in attendance on that tragic day. Kaylee plans to pursue a career encompassing entrepreneurship, corporate innovation, environmental sustainability, and political science. She is very active in Indiana University Hillel and is using her background in activism to lead a task force to prevent and combat anti-Semitism on campus. She is an active participant at the Kelly Institute for Social Impact and Net Impact, a climate change task force. She has led campaigns for TOMS and Ceasefire PA and has been featured in a United Nations documentary. And she has spoken all over the country to audiences as large as 5,000 people about gun violence. And now I would like to turn over our program to our moderator, Dina Yellen. Dina?
Thank you, Lois. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for being here for this very important conversation. I'm Dina Yellen, and I will be moderating tonight's panel on anti-Semitism. About a year ago, I interviewed several dozen students around the country for an article on anti-Semitism. Just about everybody I spoke to said that they had experienced some type of anti-Semitism on campus. Since then, the hate has soared. The ADL reported that since the beginning of this school year, over 73% of Jewish college students surveyed have experienced or witnessed some form of anti-Semitism. At Cornell and Rutgers, students made death threats against Jewish students. At Tulane, Columbia, and Harvard, Jewish students were physically assaulted. Then there's been incidents of harassment, vandalism, and intimidation of Jewish students around the country. Tonight, we assembled a panel of experts to shed light on what is happening at their universities. I'm grateful to the students and faculty members for being here to share their stories with us. And for those of you in the audience, I encourage you to submit your questions to the chat box. And at the end of our discussion, we'll try to get to those. And so without further ado, let our conversation begin. We're going to start with Lily. Lily, how has life changed for you since the Hamas attack on Israel?
Thank you so much, Dina. I think the important thing to note that while October 7th was a catalyst for the recent rise in anti-Semitism on campus, unfortunately, this climate of fear and hostility is not new for Jewish students. Previously, before October 7th, often hostility toward Jews resulted from conversations surrounding Israel and Zionism, usually associated with waves of violence in the region. So, for example, my freshman year, in May of 2021, there was a BDS bill proposed in our student government. But not only that, last fall, I was targeted in fall of 2022 on both social media and on campus via a public banner for writing an op-ed expressing my pride in my Jewish identity and my love for Israel. And the sort of lack of response from the administration after that kind of laid the groundwork to create an environment where anti-Semitism is tolerated. And so since October 7th, that environment has only grown. And so since October 7th, we have seen a lot of things at Northwestern similar to other schools, such as hostage posters being ripped down, chants of "From the River to the Sea" at on-campus protests, and the demonization of Jewish and Zionist students and Israel on social media. At Northwestern, we also saw false copies of our school newspaper distributed in dining halls, in dorms, on desks in classrooms, likening Israel's response to the Hamas attack to genocide, as well as comparing hostages to dining hall takeout containers, which are notoriously hated among the student body. We also saw a Hamas flag waved at a protest, not on campus, but in the town that Northwestern sits in Evanston. And there are pictures of Northwestern students posing with the Hamas flag, and that has never been addressed by administration. We have also seen professors bringing their political views into the classroom, into classes that have nothing to do with geopolitics or politics at all. We're seeing it in, literature classes and engineering classes, but professors have been encouraging students to go to Students for Justice in Palestine protests and rallies, have been giving free passes to students who miss class to attend those events, and saying that they, if they were not teaching, they would be there in solidarity with those students as well. And this makes it really uncomfortable for Jewish students in the classroom to be able to voice their opinions, because there's a power dynamic there. And when professors are saying something incredibly harmful, and when the rest of the class seems to agree with that, it's very difficult to be the one student to say anything contrary. And unfortunately, we've seen this also trickle down to a ton of student organizations, where previously it was Students for Justice in Palestine and a couple of others. Since October 7th, the number of student organizations that have aligned themselves with SJP and stood in solidarity, also calling Israel's actions genocide, also demonizing Jewish students, also demonizing Zionism, has only grown.
Wow. I can't even imagine what that must be like for you. Kaylee, I'm wondering how your campus has transformed over the past few months. What have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dina. And Lily, thanks for sharing that. I think that a lot of the things that you just shared is a lot of what we've been experiencing over here in Indiana as well. So, one interesting thing about Indiana is that BDS is illegal in the state of Indiana for any institution that gets money from the state. And so, before October 7th, we really never saw any of that rise in anti-Semitism coming from the left. It was always from the right, with a report that Dina did about mezuzahs being torn off of students' dorm rooms and across campus, and unfortunately, some of those being burned. We saw a lot more hostility towards Jewish students in the form of people graffitiing swastikas around campus. However, since October 7th, we've seen quite the opposite. We've seen a huge rise in anti-Semitism coming from the left, where we had never seen before. We have a lot of the things that Lily said I agree with, about professors making comments, professors turning their classroom into a space for this conversation when it's a very biased conversation. And we've also seen a lot of protests going on campus. We've been very lucky to have a support system from our faculty, and our administration has been incredible. But with that comes a lot of resentment from a lot of students towards the faculty. And so we've been bearing the burden of that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Jonah, I understand that you have had some encounters with anti-Israel protesters. I was wondering if you could share how you handled those situations and if you think it made any sort of impact.
Sure. Well, like everyone else said, I'd just like to echo, thank you all for having me and happy to be speaking today. I will say, compared to Lily and Kaylee's experiences, here at Duke, we have had a very different experience. More or less, personally, I have not experienced much anti-Semitism. As the president of Chabad, I feel fairly confident in saying that, apart from a few stories that would certainly be the exception to the rule, there were not particularly any moments that are, headline worthy of anti-Semitic relations or events. The reality is that we are faced and tasked as students now of really maturing quickly. I am 22 years old. We have 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds who are faced with the reality of, do I miss class and witness this sheer craziness, this total obscurement of the truth, and go to this event and see it from my own eyes? Or do I sit in my class and just, pray it away and kind of close my eyes to it? And what I kind of mean by that is that you are confronted with this conflict, whether you like it or not, on our campuses. There is no avoiding it. For the average person, and I'll say here at Duke, the reason why we haven't had much friction here is because most students don't want to be involved here for whatever reason that is. And I'm happy to get into that later. People don't want much to do with it here at Duke. But the reality is like Lily mentioned, we have people who are chanting from the river to the sea. We have people who are waving flags. We have people who are tearing down hostage posters. With that being said, we don't have, just like I mentioned, that friction where we don't have Jewish students or pro-Israel students on the other side of those. We're merely there, and the approach we've taken at Duke, and this is the tragedy of it all, is we are there policing. We're there to make sure that they don't break any rules, and if they do break those rules, that they're held accountable, and that we're there to witness what's going on. And the university's not stepping up to do it, and it's really up to these students. It's up to 18-year-old, children and grandchildren to police these students and make sure that they're held to the same standard as they would be with, shouting something else to a different minority group on campus. We're lucky here that we think they have been. We haven't had many, like I said, headline moments. But again, the burden is on students right now. And as I share with my family week in and week out, it's exhausting. And in a society that says enjoy the best 4 years of your life, Kaylee and I have, or Lily probably, not Kaylee, have gone COVID, and now we're dealing with this. And it's a really big task that's ahead of us.
Thank you for that. The three of you touched on something, and I apologize to the two faculty members. I'm not ignoring you, but let me just ask the three students this questions, and then I'll move on to you. The three students, you touched on something, and I just wanted to follow up on that about the administrations at your school. What would you like to see them doing? It sounds like you're not so happy with the way that they've reacted to the anti-Semitic incidents. Is there something different that you would like to see them doing that they haven't been doing?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really hard line to toe at my university. I think we've been very fortunate to have the administration that we do. And when something happens, when we bring something to their attention, they're on it right away. On October 7th, we had the head of student life at Hillel, and he was there for 3 days straight. Anything we needed, where he could support us, making sure that the anti-Semitism we were seeing on campus was stopped immediately, and that swastikas were covered, and that we weren't, that us as students were able to still feel safe. But that comes with, like I had mentioned earlier, a big sense of defeat for students that are involved in SJP,
Justice in Palestine.
yes, thank you so much. Students who are involved in organizations like that. And that has caused, I think, the biggest rise in anti-Semitism has come then from people getting upset with our administration and taking it out on Jewish students. So it has been a lot that our administration has been helping with, but it's come at a cost to Jewish student safety on campus.
Thank you. Lily or Jonah, did you also want to chime in with that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think that unfortunately it is pretty similar here, where after October 7th, a lot of Jewish students were actually hoping that the administration did not put out a statement condemning Hamas's attacks, because they were worried for the backlash that Jewish students would face as a result of that. And the way that this has been proven true is that at the end of November, the president announced the president's advisory committee to prevent anti-Semitism and hate. And the backlash to the existence of a committee intended to prevent anti-Semitism was unfortunately not entirely unexpected, but really, really terrible. All of the students who for years on social media have been saying they have no problem with Jews, just with Zionists, all of a sudden were really mad that there was a committee to prevent anti-Semitism. And so unfortunately, it's cyclical, where we want more support from the administration, but the administrative support seems only to sort of poke the bear and provoke even more hate toward Jewish students on campus and on social media.
Dina, I will just add that, when we take a step back from this conversation, Kaylee's describing someone from student life painting over swastika. We have similar, not swastika, but we have sayings and slogans painted around our campus, granted in spaces that are welcome for paint and for free expression. But a lot of what we're seeing is reactive and performative from my perspective. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we discuss this, right? We're given people who are giving us open ears at so many of our universities and sitting down at our Chabads and Hillels and having conversations. But from students I've spoken to at other campuses, there are very few examples that we can point to where administrators have had tangible results and not just formed committees and conversations about how to solve it. We're in February, this happened in October, and the academic semester ends in April or May. So this is not a thing that, this is an urgent problem that needs to be addressed urgently. And task forces and committees and listening to us is performance. It's not real tangible action.
Thank you. Professor, you've been waiting so patiently. Recently, Cornell emerged at the epicenter of this anti-Semitism story when a student made threats against Jewish students online, and a professor at a rally referred to the Hamas attack as exhilarating. What was the impact of these events on the campus community? And have things returned to normal in the weeks since?
Thank you. I'm dismayed by what I'm hearing from the students. Dismayed in multiple ways. I'm dismayed that they've had these horrible experiences and that they feel put upon and unsupported. I take it to be part of my responsibility to support students, whatever their backgrounds, whatever their points of view are on conflicts in the Middle East. So I'm very dismayed. I'm also dismayed that I think, and I will directly answer what you asked, Dean, in this way, by what I think is a terrible misunderstanding of the nature of free discourse on American campuses, which I think is part of a larger set of issues that I hope we'll get to. But relating this specifically to Cornell, I work very closely with students from all backgrounds because I teach in Jewish studies and the Department of Near Eastern Studies. I engage many Jewish students, Israeli American students, Arab American students, Muslim American students, students from abroad, and students with no obvious connection to this conflict. And I make it my business to stay in touch with all of them and to check to see how they're doing during a time when tensions on campus are significant. And at Cornell, tensions have been significant since October 7th. Having said that, I'm sorry, I have to tell you that you misrepresented, Dina, what catalyzed things on campus. We had a professor or two engage in provocative, I would say performative speech that a lot of people would take exception to, and a lot of people might just discount or look the other way or whatever. We had one, I believe, there might have been a second, but one anonymous student not posing as himself on a fraternity discussion board post vile, horrific, threatening, violent language directed against Jewish students, and in particular, a group of students living in our Center for Jewish Living, where some of my advisees and some of my very own students live. It turns out, if the FBI and the New York State Police are correct, the person charged with having done so was a very disturbed student who's currently in custody with no connection whatsoever by background or politics or anything else to this conflict. What happened, however, because of the inflammatory nature of the post and the fact that it went viral around the world within moments of it being seen, Cornell ended up being labeled as a place that was unsafe for Jewish students, where it was globalized, this threat, and so that stuck. And you mentioned it when you introduced your question to me, and I just don't think it's a fair or accurate portrait of at least what's happening on my campus. Let me make two observations. One, I think, first of all, I'm trained as a historian. We study context, we study definitions, we look for complexity where others might prefer not to find it. That's just what I do. So my work as an academic may be different than what I experience when I'm sitting in my shul and listening to my rabbi or listening to people in my Jewish community, taking in what their perspectives and experiences are. Similarly with my students. But my responsibilities as a teacher in the classroom are totally contrary to what I heard mentioned by these students' very unfortunate experiences. The classroom cannot be used as a platform for a faculty member's political agenda. Certainly not in a way that threatens students, that worries students, that has them running for the exits, or that is privileging students who may agree with the faculty member. This is contrary to everything I understand about a university education. Our space is dedicated to the exchange of views. Sometimes these views are going to be things that we do not like to hear. And it's my job to protect that space and to train students to be able to both listen to, but to frame what they're thinking in a way that doesn't offend, but invites other students with other perspectives to listen and engage. That's what I take my job to be. So that's I think it's a mistake to talk about rampant anti-Semitism on American campuses writ large. I think it's different on every campus. The extent of anti-Semitism, the experience of students with anti-Semitism, it varies greatly, number one. Number two, from my perspective, it's also a mistake. Now I'm speaking as an American Jew, not only as a cultural historian. It's a mistake for us to dissociate the admittedly horrific increase in anti-Semitism and in violent acts directed against Jews over the last years from other forms of hate in the United States, directed against the LGBTQ community, against the African American community, against the Muslim American community. And I'll say one more thing in that respect. The Muslim American and Arab American students on campus are terrified of their position. They're a much smaller group than the group of American Jewish students on most campuses. They're a smaller number in the population writ large. They are so afraid to ask a question, to speak their mind, to express a political point of view, lest they be labeled something horrible that they don't want to associate themselves with.
I think you raise an excellent point that there's a lot of racism and there is a lot of Islamophobia and homophobia. And but the complaint that I've heard repeatedly from Jewish students is that when there's other kinds of hate against other minority groups, it tends to be treated differently. And it's only when it's against Jews and when it's anti-Semitic that all of a sudden the university says, well, there's free speech and it depends on context. So I'm just wondering if any of the students want to comment on that, on the fact that anti-Semitism might be treated a little bit differently at universities.
I would,
Go for it, Jonah.
sure. I just want to address one thing about what the professor said. I am the president of a university organization. I am aware of the ins and outs of how organizations run, the rules at which they need to be governed. I think the issue and the objection that many Jewish students have, and that the root of anti-Semitism is that these protesters are abrasive and confrontational in the way that they're approaching these Jewish and Zionist students. And I think there's a difference. I'm aware as the president of Chabad that when Jewish students go out and they do something, they're reflecting Chabad, they're reflecting Judaism, they're reflecting me. And what I do on many occasions is when someone writes something in a chat or posts something on Instagram, it is my responsibility as a Duke student, as a leader, and as a Jew to say to them, this is not how we speak. This is not how we engage in the conversation. And those voices clearly are missing on the other side, because at Duke, we have been fortunate that it seems as though we have respect. We have people who believe different things and are able to still go to the same courses together and feel safe. But it's very clear that on most of these campuses, places like Indiana, Northwestern, Cornell, Duke, these are the best universities in the world, supposedly admitting the best students and the best people in the world, who lack any ability to see the people on the other side of the argument. And I would argue we should be proud of our Jewish students, that they're doing this in a very respectful way, and they're getting through day by day. And at the end of the day, they're there for their education. And if they could support Israel and support Judaism on the side, great. But what from I've seen is most Jewish students want to go to Duke. They do not want to be involved.
Thank you. Professor, I see you have your hand raised, but
Let's hear from the rabbi first.
didn't get his question yet. So let me get to the rabbi and then I'll get back to you. Rabbi, this generation on campus has endured COVID. Many students grapple with anxiety and other disorders. And more recently, they watched this brutal attack on October 7th. And instead of being able to grieve for what occurred, they were faced with anti-Israel protests, which grew more aggressive after the war began in Gaza. With all of that going on campus, what kind of support do you think Jewish college students need, and where can they find it?
Well, thank you, Dina, for the question. Thank you, Lois, for convening this panel tonight. Thank you to all the panelists. It's been like a very important convening tonight. I would say importantly that, and just to reflect on even some of the comments made just now, that what we're dealing with in a lot of ways is a blurring of distinctions, and things are getting very confusing. So where is the line again between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and how do people understand those to be those distinctions? And I think, as I think Jonah said a little while ago, it's very confusing. It's like it's a lot to put on someone, on a student, to figure out all these things. So I mean, that's part of the college process, to go through the exploration, to meet people with differing opinions, to your right and to your left, with different opinions and different perspectives. What I think people need is to come together in different ways. I think going through this, these last 4 months in particular, has been very difficult in isolation. We spend time on our phones, doom scrolling Instagram, and it's not productive on social media. You see the extremes, you see people getting attacked, you see people saying really horrible and heinous things that people would never say to you if they were sitting across from you at the lunch table. And so I think what Hillel and Chabad and others on campus have done really well is convene communities to come together. Right after October 7th, the Princeton Chabad and the Princeton Hillel, we call it the Center for Jewish Life here, I think Duke calls it the same actually, convened a vigil which brought 400 people from all different parts of the community together, which was a remarkable show of solidarity and support for our students here. And it showed how awful October 7th was, literally the most horrendous day in Israeli history, one of the worst days in Jewish history. And so I think there's been support here and elsewhere. I also think it's complicated, as I was saying earlier, right? There is a war going on. It's part of a larger narrative. It's part of an American ecosystem that's complicated with the right and the left and identity politics and so forth. And I mean, a lot of American Jews identify as Democrats, but you know, it's being hard to know where we stand. And you know, I think it's all very complicated and confusing, frankly. And so what we do together is we come together and talk about it and figure out where we are and support each other as we wade these waters together.
Thank you for that. That leads me to my next question, which is to Lily. Have you found any non-Jewish groups on campus that have expressed allyship with Jewish students in the weeks following October 7th?
I really wish I could say yes. But unfortunately, we've either seen groups completely aligning themselves with Students for Justice in Palestine, standing against Zionism in Israel, and in fact putting out statements that clarify that Zionists are not welcome in their space, or we've seen silence. And I think that when you go to an individual level, there are individual students, particularly non-Jewish friends of mine, who reached out, you know, on October 7th and in the days following, to check in, to see how things, you know, how things are going, to see, you know, if everyone I know and love in Israel was safe. And I know that other Jewish students have experienced this as well, that support from individual non-Jewish friends. But unfortunately, at an organizational level, we have not seen any non-Jewish organizations not even come out in support of Israel, but in fact say, you know, we stand with the Jewish community.
Jonah, did you have something similar or different happen on your campus?
Just to clarify, similar to what, like?
At your campus, did people come out, or did you find that it was disappointing? in terms of people expressing their support for the Jewish community?
Yeah, we've had a lot of success interfaith-wise, reaching out on that regard. My approach at Chabad has been mostly introducing people to Judaism to avoid that moment where you don't see the human on the other side of the phone, as the rabbi mentioned. Using that kind of as a bridge, never discussing the Israel issue, but more so saying, hey, we're all, people who are, faith-based, and let's kind of just find where we see eye to eye and what we have in common. Largely, Duke is not political. Like I said before, people don't want to engage in it. I think this is not the time post October 7th that we're seeing new players. We're just seeing those that were actively involved already and, getting louder and more involved than before. But largely, I think people show support, like Lee said, individually. We had a similar vigil. People attended the vigil, but like anything else, to many students, it's hard for them to understand our connection with Israel and the Jewish people. It's, like the Ukraine-Russia war that fades from the headlines and it fades from college student headlines. A lot of students have the luxury right now of going back to normal and living their lives. And frankly, I don't hold it against them. I don't need my non-Jewish friends checking in every single day because then I'm reminded of it as well. So my personal relationships have been supportive, but largely you don't see organizations supporting, going out of their way to support the Jewish community, unless it's us reaching out to them.
Thank you. Professor, your course is essentially ground zero for the controversy in the Middle East. Tell us how you're able to keep calm in the classroom when you're exploring a topic that by its very nature elicits controversy. And can that model be replicated elsewhere so that students can continue to dialogue on that topic?
Right. Well, I think it is happening elsewhere. I've read recently that there's an experimental course at Dartmouth that's doing exactly this. And I take it that it's happening at a few other college campuses. Unfortunately, the media covers conflict and fear. And sadly, fear and conflict are also being used to fundraise, adding to my dismay about everything that's happened over these last months. But I'll tell you about my courses. I teach 2 courses directly related to what we're talking about tonight, and have been for a very long time. One is a history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'll tell you about that in a minute. I've also been teaching, and I'm teaching just this semester, and did last spring and once before, in response to my concern about some of the developments in American society, wanting to do something about it from an educational perspective. I teach a course called Antisemitism, Islamophobia, Racism, looking at the intersectionality of these 3 forms of hate through history down to the present, and showing that where one manifests itself, invariably, the other manifests itself as well. Not 100% of the time, but invariably. So what do? These courses attract students of every background and every political perspective. The first day, I read them the Riot Act. I say that this course is not about advocacy. And if that's what you're coming to look for, if you're coming to the course to hear affirmed everything that you hold dear and do not want to hear anything other than that, then it's probably the wrong course for you. And some students trickle out. Almost all stay. And with just a couple of exceptions every semester when I teach this, I get buy-in from my students that to approach these very contentious topics in a properly educational way within the guardrails and to use historical and critical methods, we can learn how to hear other voices and maybe even discover empathy and understanding for points of view we mostly, in most cases, students don't change their stripes. I learned how to do this by teaching comparative religion. Now, you already know, because I've been outed, I've outed myself as someone who attends synagogue. But when I went into a comparative religion class, I can't go in and say, well, wink, wink, conservative Judaism, which is what I follow, is without question the best religion for all of humankind. But now I'm going to teach you about varieties of Christianity, other varieties of Judaism, and varieties of Islam. And in fact, what I really want to do is I want to convert Presbyterians to Shi'i Muslims and Roman Catholics to Reform Jews, and so on and so forth. You can understand why you cannot do that in a university classroom with religion. I learned I could apply exactly the same technique and guardrails in teaching subjects as contentious as Judeophobia, Islamophobia, racism, and even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I owe all of this to my students who are accepting of willing to work within that framework and begin to meet people with whom they naturally might disagree in discussion section, during lunches and dinners that I hold for students, and so on. And a lot of good comes of this in terms of where people end up. Not everyone, not all of the time, but these are the rules and as I said, the guardrails that I think are necessary to approach contentious subjects in the classroom. It's a model for how the university really succeeds in educating on this and other contentious topics. And I think it works. I mean, it's worked for me since 1986 at Cornell. Doesn't work for everybody. A lot of people don't want to touch it. They want to hear what they know, what they believe. They don't want to hear anything else. That's fine. Take another class.
Thank you. Jonah, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned to me that you think one of the greatest challenges to peaceful coexistence has to do with the fact that you think pro-Israel and pro-Palestine groups seem to have two different sets of facts. Can you explain what you mean by that and whether you think there's any path towards understanding between the two groups?
Sure. And I think this applies to everybody. What we're seeing online, particularly, is a group of students in the context of this conversation who are given a completely different set of facts about realities in which we see everything differently. And the idea that you can educate someone or teach someone away from that, I think, is becoming less and less possible. And let me offer a few examples, to elaborate. The Duke Students for Justice in Palestine Instagram account has posted that Israel killed its own people on October 7th from a helicopter. Now, what am I to say to somebody other than that's not true? They believe it. Their source from Al Jazeera or whatever else it is, from Electric Intifada, that says something directly contradictory to what I'm saying, or that the hostages don't exist, right? So the idea that someone can come in and say, let's talk about it. I am a little bit weary and not so willing to engage in those conversations, unfortunately, because once those facts are out of the open, their fact is there, and my fact says the opposite of their fact, where are we meant to go from there? And I think that we could talk about strategies like the professor's course, and I think those are important, but those only cover a half of the story. And I think that as a society, Jews, we're going to have to figure out, is this even something that we can solve by ourselves? Is this a larger thing that, the social media companies are going to have to address? I don't know the realities of it. But at Duke, every single day, we're found reporting some other student organization for saying that is something that I just think, and most media say is objectively false. The third example I give is denying the New York Times story on sexual assaults on October 7th. If someone says they don't believe the New York Times, what is Jonah Scherl to say to them that the New York Times is true? It's the New York Times. What am I going to say to them that's convince them otherwise? It's a real battle we're fighting on that end, and that I really don't know if anyone has offered anything remotely close to a solution.
Thank you for that. Rabbi, I understand that Hillel at Princeton welcomes a vast range of students who harbor different political views. Tell us what your Friday night dinners look like.
Makes my job very interesting. Yeah, I mean, so it's one of the best things about the Center for Jewish Life at Princeton that we have such a wide spectrum of political opinion, of religious belief. We have, when we were talking with Dina earlier, we have student leaders who are in the pro-Palestine rallies, and we have obviously students who are counter-protesting, and they are both at our Friday night dinners. And so it's a lot to hold the community together. My job and my greatest concern actually is that our community stays intact, right? That we don't have a lot of fracturing or infighting. And we do invariably have those things, but we've managed to really approach October 7th and its aftermath in a way that has shown a basic respect for each other's opinions and beliefs and approaches. You know, and obviously the Center for Jewish Life is a Zionist institution. So as an institution, we have our own boundaries and lines, but we also want to be a place for all students, irrespective of their Zionism or anti-Zionism. So it's a really complicated place to be, as I keep on saying. It's a lot of nuance here, and also I think a really vibrant place where people are in those conversations, are engaging with each other in productive and meaningful ways, and we have to have more of those. And they're hard. These conversations are extremely hard to have, but they are the conversations that we need to be having.
Thank you for that. Now I have two a little bit controversial questions. Lily, how do you see intersectionality being weaponized against Jewish students?
Yeah, so unfortunately, intersectionality it's sort of a core principle of social justice. And the way that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israel-Hamas war are framed on campus by groups like Students for Justice in Palestine is as a very black and white, no nuance social justice issue with a clear white Israeli oppressor and a clear Palestinian non-white oppressed. And when this binary is created, we have a very politically active student body and a very left-leaning student body. And so everyone wants to, be engaged with social justice work, and everyone cares about social justice. And when it is painted as such a clear black and white social justice issue, it's very, very easy for students who come into school having no prior knowledge or connection to Israel or Palestine to take a side very quickly and then sort of subscribe to all of the propaganda and harmful rhetoric that Students for Justice in Palestine, who is painting the conflict this way, that they're using to demonize Israel. And so, unfortunately, we've seen this trickle into nearly all of the affinity-based groups and identity-based student groups on campus who have stood in solidarity with Students for Justice in Palestine, despite numerous, kind of pushback from Jewish students saying the language they're using is harmful, the mischaracterization of Israel is harmful, their denial of things like babies being beheaded and women being raped on October 7th is harmful. And unfortunately, it really is sort of being used as a weapon to get all of these student groups who prioritize and really center intersectionality in their work to get them on board. And unfortunately, I think one of the scariest ways we've seen this manifest is we have a Northwestern feminist chapter on campus, and they pride themselves on being an intersectional group. And they work very closely with the Women's Center, which is a campus institution designed to support female identifying students on campus. And not only did NU feminists and the Women's Center stay silent about the use of rape and sexual violence by Hamas on October 7th, even after, as Jonah mentioned, the New York Times investigation. But when they were asked by Jewish students numerous times to put out a statement, and were in fact, one of my friends repeatedly reached out to them, asking them why they had not commented, asking them to comment, and asking to set up a meeting with them. They ignored the first 4 emails that my friend sent. And only after my friend threatened to go to the press about the fact that they were ignoring the requests from a Jewish student to speak with them did they set up a meeting. And in that meeting between 2 Jewish students and 2 members of the Hillel staff with a staff member of the Women's Center, an adult whose job it is to support female identifying students on campus. In that meeting, she said, "We believe all survivors. However, we're not hearing from a lot of survivors. We're hearing from people who claim to be witnesses, from secondhand accounts," and basically said there's no evidence, and so there's no reason for us to speak up on this. And so I think that, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, intersectionality is being used as a tool to keep Jewish students out of particular spaces, which I think is unfortunate because intersectionality is incredibly important, and something that I have tried to center in a lot of I'm the president of College Democrats. It's something that I try to really uphold in my campus communities, in my campus organizations, but it's something that is not being held for Jewish students.
Wow. Thank you for that. Did anybody want to respond or add to that? Professor?
So the example that both of you gave about denying Hamas's atrocities against Israeli civilians on October 7th, this is the most egregious falsehood. I would urge you not to let that color other positions or views which are simply political positions that you disagree with or that you find horrifying. Our campuses have no reason to be outside of preparing people for careers in quantitative things and the sciences. If there is not space for vehement, extensive political disagreement, that as long as it does not involve calls for violence. Now, that doesn't solve this question of how you move people off denying what very clearly happened to initiate this latest exchange of hostilities between Israelis and Palestinians on October 7th. I don't have an easy solution for that. But I want to raise something else that I worry about from our conversation. And that is that the picture that we're painting this evening is being used and is going to be used to continue to attack American higher education by people who wish it ill. Now, I'm long in the tooth, and so I'm not worried about my job, 25 years down the line. But I very much fear for the well-being of the institution of American higher education in the way in which this conflict and its polarization and some of the extreme things we're hearing is being used by people to devalue, denigrate, and make wild claims about what the value of a higher education on an American campus. And I think this conversation in many ways is falling into that trap because people who, from my perspective, are demonstrably not friends of the American Jewish community are rushing to the microphones day and night, along with others in the American Jewish community, to attack college campuses because of some of the most egregious things that have happened on a variety of campuses, and because of the sense that that I think is exaggerated, that every Jewish student on every college campus is under threat for their very personhood.
Well, I think that's why we need to.
I'd love to hear what you think. I'm heartened that you're allowing space at Princeton Hillel for Jews with different positions on the conflict, on their allyship with other groups. We have that at Cornell as well, not always entirely sponsored by Hillel, but very often the best things happen when students organize these connections themselves. But I'm heartened by what you're telling us.
And I'm heartened by your comments just now that I couldn't agree more. I think the institutions that we are all a part of, Cornell and Northwestern, Indiana, Duke, and Princeton, are all really valuable and important places, right? And we want for the Jewish admissions to not decrease, but increase. We want to have vibrant Hillels and vibrant Chabads and vibrant Jewish communities on our campuses. And so we have this interesting dual role of trying to make sure to keep our places safe as possible, and also to build communities that we think are flourishing and thriving. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I think I mean, when I talk to the students at Princeton, they do not think that Princeton itself is a place besieged by anti-Semitism. They don't think so at all. It's a very safe place to be Jewish. One of the main dining halls is an entirely kosher dining hall. We have this beautiful building. We have 150 people on Friday night. Every week, people are wearing kippahs, people are wearing Hebrew, people are wearing Jewish stars. I'm sure this is not true everywhere, and I know it differs campus by campus. But I'm really proud to say that even in the aftermath of that horrible, horrible day, almost a little bit more than 4 months ago now, people are still proudly Jewish here, and I think they're proudly Jewish everywhere else or lots of other places. I know there are problems, and that deeply distresses us all. And yet, I'm really proud that we've created a community that people want to be a part of.
I wish this story got more press than the opposite.
Well, it's important to note that Brandeis University came out with a survey of anti-Semitism on college campuses. And not only did they come out with the worst campuses for anti-Semitism, but they also came out with some of the better schools that are safer for Jewish students. So I think that's important to note. And they did mention Duke and Indiana as being better for Jewish students. So I'm happy that the two of you, Kaylee and Jonah, are here tonight. So we're almost out of time, but I did have two more questions. And I'm going to address this last one for all of the panelists, and we could just go up and down and everybody can answer this one. Many parents of college-age students out there are anxious about sending their children to college in light of what's been happening on campus. What do you think would be most helpful for Jewish students to know before choosing a college or before they arrive on campus? So, Kaylee, do you want to start and then we'll work our way around?
Sure. I think that when choosing what university you're going to go to, it's important to not look at everything that we're talking about today. No matter where you go, unless you're as involved as students in the advocacy work that's being done, likely you can get away with seeing very little of the anti-Semitism that's happening. And I think that we are all on this panel, and I don't mean to speak for anyone but myself, but I am in a position where I see and I deal with a lot of it because I choose to, and that is my preferred method of advocating, is to help students who need the help in ways that I can address. But I also think that when choosing, my younger brother and sister are going on their college tours this weekend and next and deciding what school they're going to go to. And the most important thing for them has been to get to their Hillel, get to their Chabad, ask Jewish students on the campus how they feel. And I promise anybody you ask at any university tells you that it is an incredible place for Jewish students. We have one of our star basketball players on our women's team is Jewish, and every single game you see the Israeli flags out and proud for her. And we've created an incredible support system, even with all the anti-Semitism that we're facing.
Amazing. Thank you. Jonah, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm biased, but I would say that more and more I think Jewish students who are looking to college should look to the South. I think that by and large, from experiences that I've heard from students at Vanderbilt, Tulane, Emory, whatever it may be, have had markedly different experiences from students in the Ivy League and tri-state schools. And I think that, you know, the benefit of the panel right here, I'll go against you, Kaylee, a little bit. I do think that, like I said, whether you like it or not, even on a campus like Duke, where there is no anti-Semitism, you are confronted with this conversation. If you talk to someone who's a little bit older than us, maybe it was that their school, council was passing an anti-BDS resolution, or, whatever the form may be. Jewish students have to make an active decision whether they like it or not. And what Kaylee described as being involved in that advocacy work or not being involved. And that in and of itself is the decision, right? You can then once you decide to be involved, you can decide how you're going to be involved. But I think that Jewish students would be would be helping their future selves out if they really analyze the differences between these campuses. And just like you're deciding, should I go to public or private? Should I go to a northern or southern? I think that understanding who you are, which is hard to tell a 17-year-old, what kind of Jew you are and what kinds of things you stand for, and then really networking through those universities, I think would really do younger Jewish students a service.
Thank you. Lily, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm going to echo something that Kaylee mentioned. When I was touring colleges, I visited the Hillel at every school that I went to. And I think that that was sort of a great way for me as a high school student to get a feel for what the Jewish community on campus is like. And I think that sort of the strength and the pride and the resilience and the unity of the Jewish community on campuses far outweighs the anti-Semitism that students may experience. I agree with Kaylee that there are plenty of ways to sort of be removed. Even if you're seeing this stuff, you don't have to be active in, working to combat it. But I think the typical student is more impacted by the strength of the Jewish community and the support systems that exist within the Jewish community on campuses. And so that should really be the focus for high school students, looking for a strong Jewish community rather than looking to see, what anti-Semitism is like at each school.
Thank you. Professor.
So I like some of what I've been hearing for the last few minutes. I'd be a much happier camper here if I knew we were all devoted to the idea of American Jewish college students looking to experience Jewish life in all its richness and fullness as the goal for a Jewish college experience on campus, rather than seeing lists which in most cases are completely misplaced in my point of view. On campus A is less anti-Semitic than campus B, which is more anti-Semitic than campus C. Let's promote the idea that Jewish life can flourish on American campuses in a variety of ways. Jews should be looking to engage people outside the Jewish community and learn from them, and that will enrich the Jewish American experience as well.
Thank you. Rabbi?
As the person who the high school students visit all the time, please do come. We'd love to give you a tour. We'd love to humanize the experience and actually show you the place. I do think, as Professor Brand said, I think we have this like a pitfall of sensationalizing all of this and making it a little bit blown out. Like, it's not. I think the places, our institutions are strong, and I think the relationship building and the homework and the visits and the full vibrancy of the Jewish experience, as you just eloquently articulated, is present. I mean, how could it not be? We don't have the ability. I don't have the ability to dictate the experience of a student. I can guide people, and but people are so people are going to come up with their own path and their own and we can build infrastructure for them. And what we've built, I think, is very strong. And I'm proud to show it to anyone who wants to come visit.
And I guess we're wrapping up now, and I guess let's finish up with an optimistic message from our resident rabbi about the future of Jewish students on American college campuses.
Right. And I should say also that we are a small sample size of 5 panelists, and it's daunting to think that I have this 850 Hillels around the world, and like why did I have to be the one to share my perspective? You should go and ask the other 849. You know, it's like there's so many people out there. I think part of it is go out and learn more. But the optimistic piece, thank you, Dina, for the opportunity to share a closing, is that the very national anthem of the state of Israel is about hope. And that came from a time when, why should we have any hope that a modern state of Israel should ever exist? And it's important, I think, to remind ourselves from time to time that even when we think that things are bleak or things that are hopeless, even mostly important in those times is for us to have the hope that things will get better and things will overcome. My colleague and one of the most impressive spiritual leaders in America, Rabbi Sharon Brous, just wrote a book called The Amen Effect. And she wrote an article in the New York Times as well about training yourself to always show up. And I think my homework and my blessing for us all is that we keep on showing up for each other in all the ways, that we don't have to go through this period of grieving with hostages still kept in captivity in Gaza, and a war ongoing and innocent civilians dying. And we don't have to experience this alone. We can experience this together. We can show up for one another. And so the homework from this panel is to show up for someone else in your world and to ask them how they're doing and to have a conversation with them and to engage in a deeper way, especially with someone maybe you think you might disagree.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you all. This was such an inspiring discussion.
I agree. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I appreciate learning about everybody's personal experiences and your opinions, your insights. Thank you, Dina, for moderating. Thank you, Jonah, Kaylee, and Lily for giving student perspectives. Thank you, Professor Brand, for your scholarly approach and insight. And thank you, Rabbi Dunn, for your inspiration. Also, thank you, audience members, for your interest and participation. I have placed in the chat the titles of 3 books related to anti-Semitism and racism, which I highly recommend. Anti-Semitism by Deborah Lipstadt, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and Christian Supremacy, Reckoning with the Roots of Anti-Semitism and Racism by Magda Tedder. This program was recorded and will be available soon to watch on YouTube. To receive the YouTube link, please contact our office at office@ncjwbcs.org or go to our website at www.ncjwbcs.org. Thank you. Shalom.